I wouldn't be wearing this shirt or have that there Jack Torrance Funko Pop up on my shelf right behind me if I didn't love me The Shining. But it turns out, I think everything that I actually love about it came out of Stanley Kubrick's mind, not Stephen King's. It's kind of a bummer, huh? Welcome back to Drunk on Writing. This is now the third episode of the special Stephen King series of dissections. And today, we're going to talk about the 1977 release, The Shining, and its exquisite 1980 film adaptation directed by Stanley Kubrick. Plus, I'll offer my perspective on Tröegs BLIZZARD of Hops. Hopefully you can figure out by the end of this video why I picked this particular beer. And if you enjoy the Tröegs review, please remember, over at patreon.com/drunkonwriting, the very next goal will unlock a brand new series in which I review a new beer, a new whiskey, a new wine, a new something or other that you can drink each and every week. It'll be a nice timed exclusive, again, for patrons 1 week in advance, and that is coming up at the very next goal. So consider going on over to patreon.com/drunkonwriting and signing up. There are a lot more exclusives than just that, and a whole hell of a lot of goals. But yeah, I don't want to talk about that anymore, so let's talk about The Shining. Compared to Carrie and Salem's Lot, the plot of The Shining is a lot more, well, a bit more difficult to describe. On the surface, it's about a man, Jack, who lost his job and is given the opportunity to look after a hotel located in the Colorado Rockies. And then he slowly loses his mind. The reasoning for him losing his mind is where it gets difficult. And each kind of plays with its own reasons. But in the book, it's very much blamed on Jack's alcoholism and his struggle with his addiction. That's sort of played up in the movie, and we see that in a couple key scenes with Jack Nicholson sitting at the bar enjoying some martinis. But in the book, it's the gist of it. Sure, there are a lot of other things that come into play, but it's that struggle and the deterioration of the family unit that really drives along the plot in the book. Of course, there's also the fact that the Overlook Hotel, possibly building on what King established in Salem's Lot, has absorbed some evil and has taken on its own persona and is using Jack's struggle, his addiction, his weakness to take control of him, to overcome him, to use him, basically, to get its desires, which in the book is little Danny, his son, Jack's son. In the movie is, I believe, Jack himself. That was my interpretation. There's a whole lot of interpretations, but we'll get to that more in a couple minutes. But that's not all there is that makes Jack lose his mind. There are a few other, get out of jail free cards. We have cabin fever, for one. In the book, that is established fairly early on in this really long expository section, which, again, we're going to talk about in a minute because, that drove me bonkers. But yeah, so in that very beginning, they talk about cabin fever, and they actually go ahead and pretty much define it. Cabin fever is a slang term for the claustrophobic reaction that can occur when people are shut in together over long periods of time. The feeling of claustrophobia is externalized as dislike for the people you happen to be shut in with. In extreme cases, it can result in hallucinations and violence. Murder has been done over such minor things as a burned meal or an argument about whose turn it is to do the dishes. That's totally not a natural line of dialogue in the least, but I digress. In the movie, we also get a few other possible explanations for why Jack loses his mind. One that is played up a lot and kind of hinted at throughout the film is the concept of the hotel being built on an Indian burial ground. It's kind of that whole plot device that had been around for a while. I don't think they really touch on it anymore, but there are Native American motifs throughout the hotel, throughout the movie. For instance, the room wherein Jack writes his play, or so we think he's writing his play, is full on Native American motifs, Native American design windows, Native American design fireplace and everything. But even with all of that included, we never really get a definitive answer. The movie never gives us one. Stephen King never really gives us one in the book, although it's far more strongly hinted that it's the hotel itself. And in the movie, we don't really get that idea. I guess they sort of did what Lost would eventually do later on. They just kind of played on audiences' expectations and said, hey, you know, you're going to figure this out on your own. Do we have to supply the answers? No, we do not. Whatever the MacGuffin is that really makes Jack lose his mind, all you need to know is Jack gets screwed and his family gets screwed even worse. Although in the movie, you wouldn't really think of that because both his wife Wendy and his son Danny kind of escape unscathed. That's not such the case in the book. The book is pretty brutal to both of them. But maybe, you know, the audiences of 1980 just weren't open to watching Jack Nicholson beat Shelley Duvall's head in with a roque mallet. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I don't think there was much appetite for a Saw movie back then. Oh, I guess some of those Friday the 13th movies got pretty brutal, huh? Was that around then? That was around then. Oh, I don't know. But if you thought this movie was brutal in any way, shape, or form, you're wrong, one. And two, you probably haven't read. In the last video, the one on Salem's Lot, I mentioned I wasn't really digging The Shining. And that remained true, at least for the first half, because the first 150 to 200 pages or so are just a slog to get through. It was just hard. It was just all exposition. It was setting up what would come later on in the second half where the writing really truly shines. Dang. Did not mean to do that. Just gonna roll with it. Really, the first half kind of comes off as something of a confession, as if Stephen King is writing about his own alcohol problems through Jack Torrance. He's setting up how awful of a person he was, trying to confess his sins, as it were. And the whole story really revolves around this alcoholism, which we know Stephen King, he's admitted this, that he had an issue with alcohol. I wish it was better, I don't want to say better written, but I don't know, it was just something about it. Maybe, let's get real for a second. I talked about this in my recent Patreon exclusive behind the scenes, where I gave up alcohol, for the most part, for 2018, except for, you know, a smattering of these videos. I didn't do it because I was anywhere near Jack Torrance's level, but the alcohol I was drinking, it was taking me some dark places. I was making mistakes. I was just thinking wrong. And, you know, it's helped me a bit giving it up, and I feel a bit better in certain ways. Slightly more stressed out in other ways, and it's hard to have that kind of Friday evening reward. But, you know, it helps, and I can relate to the character in that way, and maybe that kind of painted my feelings on Jack and that whole first half of it. But, you know, even though I can relate, I guess I lucked out because I didn't have an Overlook Hotel trying to drive me insane and make me kill my family. That really helps. And I think that's what makes the second half so compelling, is that, you know, it uses this whole dark half of a beginning that we have where it sets up that Jack has made a lot of mistakes and is trying to make up for them. And then in the second half, we see the hotel just use Jack, abuse him, take advantage of his problems, of his weakness, and use him to get to Danny, which is the hotel's true target because of his shine powers, I guess. I think that's what it was. After reading the book and watching the movie, the whys and whatnots have gotten a little confusing. It's not the most straightforward book, not the most straightforward movie, obviously. You know, there are all sorts of theories. We're not going to touch on those. I don't want to touch on them. But I do want to say, the whole alcoholism thing, you know, as problematic as it is, as awful and horrendous and probably so nightmarish of a situation as it was, it helped give us one of King's most prolific scenes in any single one of his books. I'm talking about the bar scene, of course, which would then go on to be remade almost verbatim come Kubrick's film. Danny's just been attacked by the woman in the bathtub. She's just tried to choke him. Jack's been blamed by Wendy for doing it because she realizes something's wrong with him, whether it's alcohol, there's none in the hotel, but he's got telltale signs of having been drinking. So he gets the blame laid on him. He stumbles off, finds his way to the bar, sits down at the bar stool, imagines, we think he imagines it, that there are bottles up on the shelves, shadow bottles or something. He turns the light on, they're not there, whatever. He sits down on the stool, wraps his knuckles against the thing, tightens his fist, scratches at the bar stool, and then in what is a perfect example of a page flip, the most perfect page flip I've ever seen in any book, anywhere, in any book I've ever read. We have him doing that, scratching at the seats, knuckling his fist, and we turn the page, and Jack says, "Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?" Lloyd said it was. Lloyd asked him what it would be. "Now, I'm really glad you asked me that. Really glad. Because I happen to have 2 20s and 2 10s in my wallet, and I was afraid they'd be sitting right there until sometime next April." And Jack proceeds to sluice down 4 or 5 martinis, what he calls the Martians. Imaginary? Maybe. Are they? I don't know. It's hard to tell. Is he just drinking air? Is it all going into his system? Is it some kind of placebo effect? Regardless, he seems pretty drunk, and it seems to be getting drunker each passing minute, especially with the crowd of maybe imaginary partygoers who are sitting behind him, making fun of him, laughing at him. And he even turns around at one point to tell them to shut up, and they're just not there. And all that, for a fragile character like Jack, it's like getting stabbed in the back, which, he'd go on to do later on. But it's this point, it's this scene that is the real turning point for Jack. This is the part where he crosses the plateau. He is on his way down now. He'd have to repeat this scene a few times. The hotel would really have to go after him to get him to really turn against his family. But it's that one drink, that first drink, that cracks him, that breaks him, that sends him down the chute, as it were. And as Stephen King says, Jack has this broken switch, this broken circuit box, where if he has a drink, he is gone. He is not who he was anymore. And the hotel fully is aware of this, and it gives him everything that he needs to get inebriated, everything that it needs to take him over, which it does. And, it wins. Jack loses. Jack loses his life. He becomes this stand-in for the hotel. The hotel kind of takes him over. He ends up bashing his face in with a roque mallet until he's completely irrecognizable, and he's just like this amalgamation of all of the ghosts that are within the hotel, and he's still attacking his family, which is just kind of astounding. And I guess this is where the whole unmask that they've been shouting and quoting throughout the book kind of comes into play, because it's at this point, after Jack bashes his face in, that the hotel kind of shows its true face, right? Jack is unmasking, showing us the hotel. Now, I don't know where the Red Death bit came in. I understand it's a nod to Poe, because that was some sort of inspiration for this book. But did anything ever come of that? Did I miss something? Was it just the hotel kind of, was that the Red Death, like, hanging over everybody? That they were surrounded by it the whole time? I don't think it was ever quite pointed out. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but I don't think I missed something there. I don't think there was ever any true comeuppance on that. Regardless, I could sit here trying to analyze this movie till hell freezes over and not come up with the answers. I'm sure somebody has tried to do that. I'm sure there is whole volumes of books that could be written on this. And I'm sure people have also tried to do the exact same thing with... Before watching it again for this video, I was under the impression that the Stanley Kubrick adaptation of The Shining, co-written with novelist Diane Johnson, was remarkably different than the novel. I don't know why I ever thought that, because I never read the novel, but it wasn't. It was very much a adaptation. of the book. It was pretty faithful, except for the ending and a few moments that kind of help elevate this in the pantheon of great horror films. Which is interesting given the word that Stephen King isn't really a fan of this original Kubrick adaptation. And in fact, when another adaptation was being made back in 1997, this was a made-for-TV movie, Stephen King not only drafted the teleplay, he actually paid particular attention to the whole production to ensure that it stayed pretty true to the book. And he even got them to film at the hotel that inspired the Overlook Hotel of the story, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. I guess, and this is kind of me just guessing based on what I've read, what I've heard about the movie, King wasn't too thrilled about the loss of the main themes of the books. That is, the alcoholism and its destruction, the loss of the family, the destruction of the family. And, those were barely in the movie at all. But to be frank, I don't really care, because I think that the Kubrick adaptation is the better version of this story. Now, that might just be because of Jack Nicholson. Seriously, how good is he in this film? He is totally the reason why every single scene that I'm about to mention works. He's the reason the film works as well as it does. Now, maybe he turned a little quickly in the film, maybe a little too quickly, and maybe we kind of figured he was going to go a little nuts right from the start when he did his little eyebrow thing. But who cares? He's fantastic. And I can't imagine another person embodying this role, which is kind of funny because there were several other actors who were up for it, and several who Stephen King actually preferred over Jack Nicholson because of that exact fact, that point that we, the audience, would probably figure that he was going to lose his mind. Some of the names that were tossed around included Robert De Niro, Jon Voight, Harrison Ford, Superman himself, Christopher Reeve, and even Robin Williams. And like I said, I think overall this is a fairly faithful adaptation, except for the ending. The boiler didn't explode. We didn't have the hedge animals. And I think a lot of that was just budgetary constraints. It's hard to blow up an entire hotel and make it look real without using, a tiny little miniature. A miniature is not going to pull it off. You need to blow up the dang hotel or have some computer graphics, and they just didn't have them back then. So I'm okay with, changing the ending. We saw the same thing in Carrie, where they couldn't afford, or they just didn't want to blow up an entire town. Okay. But I think it might be more than just budgetary reasons. I think Kubrick and Johnson just took the story in a different direction. See, while the book concentrates on the concept of the hotel as this evil being, this evil persona out to get Jack, out to get Danny, actually, I think the movie really kind of focuses more on the concept of reincarnation, which is why we get the two Gradys. That is, Charles Grady and Delbert Grady, who seem to look exactly the same according to Jack, and that shot of Jack at the very end at the masquerade party or some other party. He's got his cheese-eating grin right there. Presumably, now again, this is just my personal interpretation of the film and the storyline and whatnot, there must be some sort of pull on those who once worked at the hotel or who once served there or once stayed there, maybe particularly at this party and maybe for reasons that are unclear, but there's some kind of pull for those people to come back to the Overlook Hotel, which is why Jack accepts the job, accepts the offer, despite knowing, and we know this because he mentions Grady appearing in the newspaper, even though he said at the beginning that he didn't. Despite knowing that Grady killed his family, he accepts this job willingly. He comes and he wants to be at the Overlook Hotel. And he mentions several times how much he just loves this hotel. So he's here. And maybe you know what? Maybe that explains why he turned so quickly. He was already there. It wasn't like the book. I just had a revelation. That was pretty cool. Completely unscripted. I like it. I wonder, though, if Wendy and Danny were supposed to be with him. We get the kind of aside from Delbert Grady when he's talking to Jack in the bathroom that his family is somewhere in the hotel. The two girls are off playing somewhere. Danny, of course, meets them, and yeah, they want to play. But were Wendy and Jack supposed to be killed to join them at the Overlook Hotel? Once they get away on their little tractor or crawler or whatever it is, the hotel, I guess, just kind of lets them go because we see Jack dead the next morning, frozen stiff. We don't see anything more on Wendy and Danny. So were they not supposed to be there? Were they not supposed to join him? Was the caretaker of the past, the Jack Torrance or whoever his name was, the one that we see in the picture, was he single? Did he not have a family? We get hints throughout the book of the scenes from the party where he's dancing with these other women who want to take him up to their room. And again, that's some married guys do that, but there was never talk of, hey, my wife is over there or my kid is over here. So maybe that's exactly what happened. Huh. Was Wendy in the picture at all at the end? Like I said, like with the book, I'm not going to go through every analysis for the movie. I'm not going to go into all of the Indian Burial Ground stuff, the faking of the moon landing stuff, the Minotaur stuff, whatever else there is out there, all those theories. They made a whole movie about it. I'm not going to go into that right now. I just want to talk about what I personally felt, what I personally saw, and what I feel like talking about right now? Some of the best scenes in this film. There's Jack's sarcasm in the car ride in where he says, "See, it's okay. He saw it on television." There's that hallway scene where the ball rolls up on Danny while he plays with the cars, but there's no one there. Then there's every single Steadicam shot of the trike, along with the superb sound mixing of those scenes. Of course, the all work and no play scene. And you've just got to feel for whoever was forced to type out all those pages. The Red Run scene where Danny's just screaming his head off at Wendy, only for Jack to show up right then and there with the axe and start pounding down the door. And then the, infamously ad-libbed, "Here's Johnny." And of course, the bar scene, which plays out exactly like the book, word for word. Except for the fact that Lloyd is there. He's present. He's responding. Which begs the question, which version is better? Lloyd being there or Lloyd not being there? Would he even work on film if Lloyd wasn't in the scene? It would just look like he's sitting there talking to himself in the mirror. And while that works in the book, does that work for a movie? I think they made the right call there, personally. I want to talk about the maze too, because I love the maze. But before we do, I just want to recognize the fact that I barely touched on Wendy or Danny, and I don't think I've even mentioned Dick Halloran. And this is pretty much as I'm going to mention them, because frankly, I don't think they're that interesting. They are the straight people to Jack's kind of downfall. Danny, of course, has his whole thing. He's got his Tony imaginary friend who we learn is just an older version of himself talking to his younger self or something. In the movie, he's just the little finger. Whatever. He gets premonitions. That's cool. It gives us the title of the movie. Jack losing his mind, so much more fun, especially in the movie. We watch his downfall, and it's just great to be along for the ride. So, the maze. Added in favor of the topiary animals simply because of budget and probably because they couldn't figure out how to do that effectively. They probably would have had to do kind of clay miniatures and get the actors in there, and that probably would have looked awful. And I'm kind of happy they did not do that, because we get this great maze that is played on throughout the entire film. Like when Wendy mentions the kitchen feels like a maze, or back to the trike. Pretty much every single hallway seems like a maze. Or even the trees as Halloran is coming back to the hotel. See? I mentioned them again. Well, see, that's two. Even Jack peering down at the model and seeing the little tiny Wendy and Danny at its center. It's all perfect. It all feeds into that hedge maze. It all builds up to it. This grand, epic finale as Danny leads Jack into it and outsmarts him, outruns him, and we get Jack bunching up his collar and screaming, "Oh!" He can't even breathe anymore. He's starting to freeze up and he just collapses. not next to one of the lights for some reason, which would probably have helped him survive. He just collapses into the trees and the snow, and yeah, and that leads to the one great framed scene from the next day, which happens to also be the scene that inspired today's beer. It was the end of the film that inspired this pairing, but apparently the people over at Tröegs were thinking of a completely different ending when they introduced this beer, Blizzard of Hops Winter IPA. Here's their official marketing pitch. Now I'm going to read this just so I don't get it wrong. This storm of hoppy citrus and pine notes is a bright reminder the end of the hop cycle is only the beginning. To be honest, I really wanted to pick up some Winter Jack to kind of go with that scene. Winter Jack. Yeah, get it? But I figured that's been around for a while. People have had it. People have reviewed it. Frankly, I didn't really like it too much. And I couldn't even find a bottle. C'est la vie. So I got this. Blizzard of Hops because, you know, there's a blizzard and Jack's frozen. So as you can see, it pours a nice golden color. It's got a nice stab of hops at the beginning. A lot of notes of pine. You really get the pine in there. And it's good. It tastes like an IPA. You know, there's nothing phenomenal, I would say, about this beer, but if you want a nice winter IPA, something to kind of remind you of summer, something that will get you excited for what's to come. You know, actually, now that it's sitting in my mouth, it kind of reminds me of a Hefeweizen too. Like if somebody did half and half of Hefeweizen and an IPA. So that is Tröegs Blizzard of Hops Winter IPA. And before I go and sign off with the beer, let's just give a toast to Jack. Winter Jack, frozen in the hedge maze. I really hope somebody found that body before the hotel reopened in the summer. Because you know the hotel's going to reopen, right? Didn't burn to the ground like in the book. Huh. Wow, that would have been an interesting little short to follow up on, wouldn't it? The Shining would eventually get a sequel, Doctor Sleep, which just came out a few years ago. I think it was a few years ago, which I haven't read yet. We'll get to that eventually. But The Shining was referenced in a few of King's other books, including The Stand, It, The Dark Tower, and Misery. Probably among others. I'm sure there are a couple others that I missed. Given King was supposedly inspired by a real-life hotel wherein he stayed, I'm sure the whole story of The Shining is something that never really left him, especially given how personal it is, how it works as a confession, a statement that he was an alcoholic. And, you know, I think The Shining is one that I think is going to stay with me as well. Especially given the fact that it just keeps coming up in pop culture.
Here's Johnny.
Oh, make it stop. Well, I think that's enough for today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow me over on Facebook or over at Twitter, and be sure to head on over to patreon.com/drunkonwriting and sign up for all of the sweet exclusives you can get. Don't forget, our very next goal, that weekly beer, whiskey, wine, whatever review series. Warren's 1-minute reviews. Working title, not sure I'll stick to it, but I do like the alliterations. Warren's 1-minute reviews. I like that sound. Coming up next, the very first Bachman book. Who is Bachman? What does that have to do with Stephen King? We're going to touch on that next time. And until then, cheers and keep on writing.